Nigeria has recorded 193 new cases of COVID-19, bringing the total number of infections to 5,162. The Nigeria Center for Disease Control, the NCDC, confirmed the new figures in a tweet late on Thursday. According to the NCDC, 58 of the new cases were in Lagos, 46 were recorded in Kano, 35 in Jigawa, and 12 in Yobe states. 9 cases were also recorded in the FCT, while 7 others were recorded in Ogun. Data feeds are coming through in one place simultaneously on all our social media platforms on channelstv.com and on youtube.com/channels, where you can follow us right now live on m.channelstv.com and on Android, Apple, Fire and Roku TV. The Federal Executive Council, the FEC, yesterday revised the 2020 budget from 10.594 trillion signed into law by President Muhammadu Buhari to 10.52 trillion naira. The FEC also approved the amendment of the medium-term expenditure framework, the MTEF, for 2020 to 2022. All these as a result of COVID-19 pandemic. What does this mean to Nigerians? Does this translate to harder times for the economy? It's prime time here in Lagos, and this is State of the Nation. Welcome everyone in Nigeria and the rest of the world. I am Gimba Umar and this is State of the Nation. The coronavirus scourge has hit economies in the world hard, forcing many to adjust to the realities of the current times. In Nigeria, drastic measures have been taken by the government to adjust the spending plan for the year 2020. The Federal Executive Council just yesterday revised the 2020 budget from 10.594 trillion naira signed into law by President Muhammadu Buhari to 10.523 trillion naira. FEC also approved the amendment of the medium-term expenditure framework, MTEF, for 2020-2022 and fixed exchange rate at 306 to the dollar. It also approved aggregate loan of $1.2 billion. Before now, the National Assembly had increased the 2020 budget from 10.33 trillion submitted by the executive to 10.594 trillion naira. The budget cut, especially The review of oil benchmark to $25 per barrel drew the attention of experts who advised the federal government to immediately diversify the economy with money released from realized, of course, from the sales of the product to stop depending on oil. The Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, disclosed this much while briefing State House correspondents after the virtual FEC meeting presided over by President Muhammadu Buhari at the Council Chambers, the Presidential Villa in Abuja. Now, how does this all come together in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic? Johnson Chukwu, as an economist, he joins us via Skype from downtown Victoria Island. Many thanks indeed for joining us. Well, here in the studio is Zaka Balay, a chartered accountant and a petroleum engineer. Thank you as well for joining us here on State of the Nation. Let's look at these adjustments to the budget and see how well we're able to make sense out of it. These benchmarks that have been set, do you think they're realistic?
Very, very realistic. Because from what you were just saying, I mean, we were hit by a pandemic. We are still within the pandemic. And when we were hit, I mean, it wasn't a Nigerian thing. It was a global pandemic and still a global pandemic. And what happened was it knocked off all the predictions, analysis, and calculations of global leaders, pundits, OPEC, OPEC member countries, and the rest. And at the end of the day, actually, it globally knocked off the economies of many countries to even a cliff. Many economies are now at the tip of a cliff, about to almost get into the valley. So very few are still holding on. So we are actually seeing what we can even describe as an economic tectonic. So the few adjustments that are required to keep economics moving are very, very necessary.
Let's get to Johnson Chukwu now. He joins us from downtown Victoria Island. Mr. Chukwu, you've been looking at the scenarios playing out, and just yesterday when we had the adjustments to the budget 2020, do you think the adjustments are realistic?
Thank you, Gimba. I think it's the budget that was presented to the Federal Assembly Council yesterday still look very optimistic. And what do I mean by being very optimistic? If you look at the revenue projections, the government is still projecting a revenue of about 5.15 trillion naira. And I think that's overly optimistic. The reason is that last year, when economic environment was good, of course, we have seen some adjustment in exchange rate. But apart from the adjustment in exchange rate, last year, total revenue of the federal government was only about 4 trillion naira. And if at the time when oil price was $64 average crude price last year, total revenue of the federal government was 4 trillion naira. How do we expect to make 5.15 trillion naira this year? Even if you take the fact that we have adjusted the exchange rate from about 326 to about 360, I think that is not good enough. That's not enough to offset or to compensate for the increase that you are expecting in the revenue of the government. If you, just like I pointed out, the COVID-19 crisis pandemic has led to severe shortfall in government revenue. So beyond the adjustment in crude price to $25 per barrel, virtually all the revenue heads of the government are going to suffer some contraction this year. If you look at the major revenue sources, the independent sources which come from revenues made by the institutions like NIMASA, Nigerian Ports Authority, I expect those also to contract because the major economic activities are going to go down or contract this year. Then tax revenues are also going to contract. Companies are going to struggle to make profits. So in terms of paying corporate tax, you're not going to see so much of corporate tax payment as it was in 2019. So if you look at all the government revenues, say, be it oil from crude oil sales, and again, the government has budgeted 1.94 million barrels per day crude production. That also looks very optimistic. I mean, the original budget that was approved was 2.18 million barrels. If you look at our OPEC quota, under the revised OPEC quota, our OPEC quota is less than 1.5 million barrels per day. Even if you even add the condensate production, you're not going to achieve 1.94 million barrels per day. Even if you succeed in producing 1.94 million barrels per day, the market will not take it in the next couple of months. So budgeting an average crude production of about 1.94 million barrels per day is very optimistic. So I think the budget as it stands today, the budget of 10.252 trillion naira expenditure looks very optimistic.
Okay, you say that the budget is overtly optimistic, but you don't totally agree with him. What's your views now?
No, definitely. I mean, the economy is going to contract, or it has already, I mean, shown signs of contraction. But in moments like this, we need to do an adjustment across the board. Revenues are actually going to go down. The question is this: what are the adjustments we need to do to remain afloat? If you look at the approval of the FEC, that was given to the budget, something we never expected now was added. Instead of expenditure that we're supposed to see on capital budgets, we're going to incur expenditures on what? On taking care of this pandemic. Things like that are going to be minus. And if you look at the deficit, of course, the deficit
But that's a huge minus.
Yes, it's a huge minus. But you see, in moments like this, because it is global, the effect is also going to cut across the strata of all economies. But what we must do in moments like this is to practically and physically and make sure we, with all level of prudence, make sure we now apply what we call the real economic restructuring mechanisms. We have to look at the respective sectors. Some sectors must be commercialized. Some sectors must be liberalized. Some sectors must just be deregulated. And some sectors must be privatized. When we look at them from such angles, then we'll look at where we are going to make the gains. Definitely, projections of falls in revenues are already known. They are there. But we must hold on to the economy and make sure at the end of the day, we remain afloat. In fact, at the end of this year, what we should just hope for is just basic economic survival, not necessarily economic growth.
Okay, Mr. Johnson. What we're looking at now, it seems to suggest to many people that this is just a fraction of the budget, because we're looking at a difference of 71.5 billion naira. So what's in a budget? What's in a budget when you're looking at the differential this time around as a result of the adjustment? Is just about 71.5 billion naira. Does that in any way distort the calculations and the allocations to different sectors, sectoral allocations? Does it distort it that much?
Okay, Gimba, there are a couple of things you have to look at. Of course, we don't have the detailed expenditure budget, but some of the expenditure profile of the government are what we call non-discretionary expenses. Expenditures like personnel costs. If you look at the original budget that was approved by National Assembly, the provision for personnel costs is 3 trillion naira. There's a provision about 2.4 trillion naira for debt service. Those are non-discretionary. So in the new budget, the revised budget, those two components will still be there. And then you have to look at government overhead. The original plan of the government was to spend about 1.7 trillion naira. And that's one area they can adjust. But 3 trillion naira for personnel costs and 2.4 trillion naira as debt service are certainly going to be there. So there's little headroom for the government to adjust because of our current bloated cost structure. Bureaucracy. And that's why this opportunity should nudge the government to restructure the bureaucracy so as to minimize the cost of governance. If you look at the issue of debt service, today, like I did say last year, our total revenue was about 4 trillion naira, and debt service was about 2.4 trillion naira. So debt service was almost taking about 70% of our total revenue last year. And this year is going to be worse because revenue has collapsed. So in terms of adjustments, the adjustment of 71.5 billion naira, the Minister of Finance said that what they did was they adjusted downward some of the expenses, but they had to also include new expense lines, particularly for managing the COVID-19 pandemic. So they added new expense lines. We need to see the breakdown of this. But the major challenge is that we have ratcheted up our cost profile to the extent that government does not have so much latitude to bring down its cost unless we restructure the bureaucracy.
Okay, just before we go on a very quick break now, this is what we have as the deficit to the budget, 5.365 trillion naira. Some believe that this is avoidable deficit. Do you agree with people who think in that line?
I think the 3.6 trillion naira deficit is extremely high. Of course, the government is already making plans to fund it. Currently, there's a provision by government to put about $6.9 billion. 3.4 billion has already been agreed with IMF. The government is working to put about $2.5 billion from the World Bank, another $1 billion from Afrexim. There's also a plan to borrow from Islamic Development Bank. I don't know the amount they want to borrow from that. But if you look at the $6.9 billion they plan to borrow, at 360 naira to a dollar, it amounts to about 2.45 trillion naira. So if you take it away from the 5.3 trillion naira, you're just looking for just about 2 trillion naira. In effect, the government obviously wants to fund the entire deficit from borrowing. As you also know, that the government has gotten the National Assembly to approve an 850 billion naira local borrowing. So adjust for that, you are left with just about 1.4 trillion naira they need to borrow. I don't know whether they intend to borrow that from Islamic Development Bank,
Okay.
but they also said...
we have to go on a very quick break, and when we come back, we'll analyze that further, especially what the finance minister said, Zainab Ahmed, when she talked about the borrowing plans for the government in view of what the IMF has offered already, as well as the Afro-Exim Bank. Join us again. Welcome back to State of the Nation. We're looking at the adjusted 2020 budgets here in our country, Nigeria. Zaka, this is what the finance minister said. She said just yesterday that the foreign borrowings we are doing for 2020 are all concessionary loans from the IMF, which have already been approved and have crystallized from the World Bank, Islamic Development, as well as the Afro-Exim Bank. There will also be some drawn down of previously committed loans for major ongoing projects that we will be drawing from both existing facilities as well as some special accounts with the approval of Mr. President and the National Assembly, and also revenues that are expecting to be realized from the privatization process. Now, does that give us a level of comfort with regards to the budget and the implementation, which has always been, year in, year out, a major challenge?
Well, when you say a level of comfort, it depends. I personally don't feel very comfortable when I'm a debtor. You know, and when you're talking about being like a corporate entity, when your debt to equity ratio is getting high, at a point you will become so highly geared to the point where if you're not careful, you are going to be thrown into liquidation. But from what you read also, she said some of those, debts have crystallized already, which means regardless of the COVID-19, we were already expecting, or there were discussions or arrangements, to get those debts. The key thing I think we need just to do this time around is to make sure to a reasonable extent we reduce the extent to which we are going to be hit from outside. And what that simply means is this: to what extent can we internally look at our economy, analyze it, internally domesticate things so that we don't suffer from exchange rate differentials. Remember that we are still importing distillates. So if we have to continue importing distillates, to what extent are we going to be hit? Looking at now the exchange rate. Knowing also that, a lot of economies are struggling as we speak. Many economies actually are depending on what we call strategic reserves. Any moment from now, many countries will run out of strategic reserves, whether you talk about crude oil, food, and the rest. So something has to be done such that in the case of Nigeria, we must not rely on exports. Because if we have to rely on exports, we will definitely be hit. So the question now is this: what do we do? To what extent can we do something about our oil and gas industry, especially the refineries, such that we will reduce import effects? To what extent? We already know that when you look at general transportation, air transportation is really going to suffer. So we're not expecting much from there. We are expecting job losses and the rest. Then internally again, because we don't have interstate movement, when you relaxed lockdowns, those who actually gain are artisans. But artisans also depend on skilled labor. It is the skilled labor that will fly from Lagos to Abuja, lodge in a hotel. Then the hotel will be useful. The skilled labor will go to a dry cleaner. Then a dry cleaner will be useful. When the skilled labor gets to Abuja or Port Harcourt, a taxi will pick him. In the process, a vulcanizer will make money. When a skilled labor is trying to go to somewhere for a meeting, then he needs to go to a barber. So as long as skilled labor does not have that flexibility and mobility, we are not likely to generate much. Because artisans, yes, are those making in Abo. They depend on the dexterities and the mobility of skilled labor to be able to remain useful and to survive.
Okay, let's toss it over to Mr. Johnson Chukwu. This is what the Minister for Agriculture and Rural Development, Alhaji Sabo Nanono, said, that the council approved a facility of $1.2 billion to finance mechanization of agriculture in the country. To what extent do you think mechanization can help us out of falling into recession?
Well, it wouldn't help us from falling into recession. The recession is already around the corner. What we are expecting is that at the time we get to the report of the first quarter and the second quarter, it would have crystallized. So there's actually almost nothing we can do to escape recession. We're not the only economy that is going to experience recession this year. Germany, I just reported, its economy has gone into recession with a contraction of 2.2%, added to the 0.1% contracted in the last quarter of last year. The basic thing we need to do is to position the economy to be able to weather similar economic crises that may occur in future better than we are doing now. So if we are irrigating or irrigating the farmlands, or buying inputs for the farmers, or support the farmers in whatever method we want to do, the basic thing is that one, we need to look at what we may call the heavy lifting. What is our land tenure system, land ownership system, and then when you look at that, you look at the transport infrastructure that you need to support the agricultural sector. The add to that is the need for us to have the appropriate mechanisms for preserving agricultural products. Evacuation is important, which is the transport infrastructure. And then we also need to develop the supporting industries or supporting infrastructure like power supply, so that we go into value addition in agricultural production. One, that will reduce what we import, because a lot of times we export the raw food items and import the finished products. If we have stable power supply, good transport infrastructure, then whatever is produced in the farm, the level of obesity will come down, because it can actually be taken to the factories and processed. So we need to look at all those things to improve our value chain and improve the viability of the agricultural sector. So there's actually nothing that the government will borrow to the agricultural sector that will circumvent the issue of economy going into recession. It's just for us to build the appropriate economy that will be more stable in future. Even when you talk about economic development, it is never something you just wake up in the morning and say you are taking policies, the economy from the next day. No, sometimes you need 2, 3, 4, 5 years of detailed planning and execution for your economy to transform. Remember, that it took Nigeria almost 10 years to become cement sufficient. It didn't just happen overnight, but the policies we have put in place, and over a period of time, we see improvement in cement production. And today we are exporting cement. We are self-sufficient. We can replicate that in several sectors where we have competitive advantage. But it can't be a light bulb effect. You can't just wake up because government has raised a
Okay, let me bring it back here in the studios. Zaka, how do we approach this? Because everybody is trying to, every other economy is trying as much as possible to see that the impact of COVID-19 is lessened on the citizens as much as possible, as the federal government here in our country is doing. But looking ahead, do you forecast, or should I say, what sectors do you forecast will be worse hit? And with the adjustments in the budget, do we expect to see better allocations to certain sectors, as it were?
All sectors will be hit. But this is the time that we must accept and support the government and agree that in moments like this, our government will be the biggest debtor because they will need to look for loans. Our government will be the biggest investor. Our government will be the biggest customer, and our government will also be the biggest guarantor. In moments like this, we have to understand that this pandemic is an economic tsunami that can brush everybody. It has nothing to do with how holy you are, which political party you belong to. In fact, what it has just succeeded in doing is in making us now realize and appreciate what it means to be citizens of Nigeria. Because regardless of what you think you are now, you can get into another country. This is a time to look inwards, regardless of our differences, and see our diversity as the strength we have always needed for national unification and growth.
That's a good place to let it rest. Most sincerely, thank you so much indeed, Zak Abala, an economist, a petroleum engineer, and of course a chartered accountant, for sharing your thoughts with us on this very vexing topic, if you will, for the adjustment of the budget 2020. And also to you, Johnson Chukwu, many thanks indeed for talking to us. Always a pleasure having you to discuss economic issues, as you are an expert in that region as well. Many thanks indeed for talking to us. And to everyone, many thanks indeed for watching. I'm Gimba Umar, and this is State of the Nation. Bye.